Hi everyone, welcome back to controlsnyc. In this video, I'll explain how we've been trying to connect to Niagara, our plan, and the issues that we've had along the way. It's been a few days since we've uploaded a video, and the reason why is because we've had several issues starting on Niagara. But before I go through those, I'll go through our initial plan and our thought process. So here's our plan. First, we connect the controller to an existing station. Then we back up the station, and we copy the backup to the local host. And last but not least, we duplicate the backup of the station to use it to work on our projects. The reason we decided to go this route instead of just creating a new station and starting from scratch is that we wouldn't have to configure a whole new backnet network, and we could just use the pre-existing one. First up, we have to discover the device on an existing station. To get anything done on Niagara, you first have to connect a controller. This is called discovering a device. To do this, you have to establish a network connection between the device and the workstation. We devised this setup to do just that. We have our controller right here, which is powered by a power transformer and connected to this IP MSTP adapter. We need this because the controller runs on BACnet MSTP while the workstation uses IP to communicate. The IP MSTP adapter essentially gives the controller an IP address when it normally doesn't have one. I'll talk more about this in a second, but these devices have their own IP addresses. For security reasons, these are not the real IP addresses, but I'll just be using these in the place of the real ones. Anyway, as we can see in the diagram, we have Ethernet cables connecting to the adapter and the workstation, with copper wires connecting the adapter, controller, and power. We have to physically connect these ports with wiring by screwing them into place, and to know which wires went where, we had to carefully read the labels on the pieces to see which wire was 24 VAC, BAC+, BAC-, etc. The issues we faced here was that the transformer was not initially working, so the controller wasn't turning on. We eventually ended up replacing one of the wires on the transformer, which got it going. However, we had a lot of issues with the Ethernet cables and making sure everything was connected correctly. At one point, the workstation just stopped pinging the adapter, and it took us a while to get it working again. Once everything was set up, we then had to configure the IP address of the workstation so that the devices could interact. Despite the physical wiring between these components, they can't interact if the IP addresses are not in the same octet. To understand what this means, let's look at an IP address. Looking at this IP address, we can see that we have 4 groups of numbers separated by periods. First, we have 192 and 168. This means that it's a Class C private IP address, and many devices will have these numbers in the beginning. Next, we have 43 and then 78. When we want to connect wired devices, the first 3 groups of the IP addresses have to be the same. So in this case, if we want to connect to this device, 192.168.4378, we have to use, for example, 192.168.4379, and so on. We had to do this for the workstation so that it could match the octet of the adapter. To do this, we have to open up Network Communications, click on Ethernet, go to Properties, and then Configure. From there, you're able to put in your own IP address that can only be applied for the Ethernet connection. To make sure everything was connected and the IP addresses were set up properly, we had to go into the workstation's command prompt and ping the adapter. This essentially sends data to the adapter and verifies that there is a connection. The command for this was to type in ping 192.168.43.78, and to check the IP of the workstation, we had to type in ipconfig. It's important that you only check the Ethernet IP because the other ones are not related. We had some more hiccups along the way, mostly because it was my first time working with IP addresses and command prompts. Looking back, it's not very difficult, but it did take me a while to get used to and to configure correctly. At this point, we're finally ready to connect the controller. To do this, you have to go onto Niagara, which is on the workstation, and then discover the device. We were planning on going onto a pre-existing controlsnyc station, which is a previously configured BACnet network, so that we wouldn't have to do it ourselves. In order to discover a device on a BACnet network, you have to log onto the station, open config, go to drivers, and BACnet network. Before being able to discover the device, you first have to change the object ID to a non-negative number under local device. Then click discover and input the device information, and the workstation should pick it up on its own. However, when we did this, we got an error message. We tried troubleshooting and messing around with the BACnet connection, the network, things like that, but we just couldn't get it to connect. We did troubleshoot for a few hours before we finally got it. Then we opened the controller in engineering mode to make sure that we could edit the logic and actually build the systems, and that is the end of our step. So let's look at our steps. We've connected everything and discovered a device. Now we have to back up the station to ultimately copy it and get started on our own work. Backing up the station was very easy, quite literally a right click and back up. After finding it in the files, we copied the file to the user stations. This would allow us to use the station copier to copy the backup to the local host. We initially did this step wrong, but after a few tries we got it. The only issue was we realized that we couldn't copy the station once it was on the local host. We tried for a few hours, but eventually we realized that we had to make the duplicates before copying it to the local host. This was a little frustrating, but we started over. We took the backup file, duplicated it, renamed it ESB for Empire State Building and Chrysler for the Chrysler Building, and then copied those over to the local host using the station copier. Now we were almost done. We just had to give each station a unique port number. In Niagara, each station uses a FOX-S port number to run. Since we copied the backup, everything will have the same port number, which we don't want. To change this, you have to go into Station, go to Config, and then to Services, Fox Services, and then Fox and FOX-S port number. We changed the numbers and then tried opening the stations to finally get started. Unfortunately, we received an error message. So we went to the station administrator and we noticed that the stations were failing to run. They said that the port numbers were incorrect. We tried changing the port numbers a few more times, recopying the stations over to the local host, but we just couldn't figure it out. This is where we are right now. Right after I'm done with this video, I'm literally going to head over there and try to figure it out one more time. I have a feeling that it obviously has something to do with port numbers, but they shouldn't really matter as long as they are different from the other station port numbers. Either way, I don't really know what else it could be, so I'm just going to have to take another crack at it. This has definitely been a huge learning experience. I learned a lot about the wiring and how to physically set up a controller, which was very cool. I also liked learning about IP addresses. It was cool to connect the devices on the network and access them through just the IP addresses. Looking back, our thought process was flawed, especially as far as duplicating the backup after copying it to the local host. I guess we thought we could copy stations, but if that was the case, we would have just done that instead of going through the whole backup process, so that was definitely an oversight. Hopefully we can get all this sorted out by the end of today, and we can start posting Niagara content tomorrow. This process has definitely been more lengthy than I thought it would be. I remember walking into the office thinking this can't take more than an hour, and 2 full days later, here I am, but at least I've been learning along the way. Anyway, that's it for this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay updated. Please give us any recommendations, suggestions, or advice in the comments because they are greatly appreciated. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.